Hi everyone, Sean here from Attack Panic, and in this lesson we are going to take a closer look at your specific condition, PTSD. It's important to keep in mind that this lesson is an extension of lesson 1 and should be watched in conjunction with that lesson. Sufferers of PTSD can experience constant flashbacks, nightmares, inappropriate and intrusive thoughts, usually relating to a traumatic event or an initial catalyst. In addition to flashbacks, PTSD sufferers may also experience panic attacks. How anxiety conditions such as PTSD manifest is outlined in Lesson 1. However, let's dig a bit deeper to really help you understand what's really going on. The experience of trauma can be devastating to anyone. This could be anything from witnessing or being victim to a horrific event, or experiencing a huge loss, whether it be a bereavement of a loved one or even a pet, or some other loss like a financial loss. This leaves indelible scars etched into your memory for life. Anyone who has gone through trauma or loss can relate to all the anxiety and pain that such a loss can cause. Now this of course is part of life, and we all have to deal with loss at some stage. Unfortunately, some more than others. For the most part, through the right support, we are able to move through the grieving and healing process. Counselling and therapy play an important part in moving through the grieving and healing process. I wish I had have taken the opportunities to go through counselling and therapy all those times I experienced trauma as a young and impressionable police officer. I believe it could have made a big difference to me. Whatever the loss or trauma is that you experienced, it takes time to heal. Time is the healer. So, over time, with the right support, you learn to accept and move on and live with the loss and get on with your life as a normal, non-anxious person, whatever normal is. This is the case for most of us. You will never forget the event or events. In fact, everything is etched into your memory for life. But when you go through the normal grieving and healing process, over time you look back, and while there will still be pain to a certain degree, your memory no longer triggers all the anxiety that it once used to. For some of us, maybe we don't deal with the difficult times the right way. Maybe we don't get or accept the right support. Or maybe we operate under extreme conditions for prolonged periods, and we don't give ourselves the opportunity to relieve the pressure or stress and come back down to normal stress levels, say 3 to 4 on the anxiety scale. I know this was the case for me in both scenarios. Maybe you can relate to this. High anxiety produces corresponding anxious behavior. And if the state and behavior is prolonged, you run the risk through repeated behavior of your anxiety levels becoming stuck at higher than normal levels, say 6 to 8. Your behavior corresponds with your high anxiety levels. You have conditioned yourself to behave anxiously. This is a learned pattern of behavior. Your subconscious mind thinks that this behavior is perfectly normal. Normal, everyday situations, even sounds and smells, trigger a completely inappropriate, anxious response. You start avoiding certain situations that trigger this anxious response. You use coping strategies and safety crutches to help you manage anxiety-provoking situations that you cannot avoid. And without your safety crutches or coping strategies, it is highly likely that unless you are able to escape from the situation, your anxiety levels would escalate to the point where the fight or flight response is triggered. You will have a full-on panic attack. If this happens, this highly emotional event is etched into your memory. If this isn't nipped in the butt, a phobia of that situation or thing is formed. This is very destructive for you and those around you. You start restricting your life in order to avoid the anxious or panic response. Let's take a look at student D's case. I said we would check up on him from time to time. Over his 17 years of policing, D was exposed to many traumatic scenarios. He saw a lot of shit. Dead bodies, homicides, rapes, physical and emotional abuse against women and children, violent attacks on innocent victims, including himself, and loss and even killings of colleagues. D never sought counselling or therapy throughout his career and never gave himself the chance to work through and resolve the trauma. It wasn't the thing to do back in the day. Pretty soon, D found himself operating in a constant state of high anxiety. His behaviour corresponded with his anxiety levels. High anxiety put him in a highly sensitised state. All his senses were on high alert. He found himself in a constant, agitated, on-edge state. Over time, this behaviour, this anxious state, became normal. D had programmed himself through operant conditioning to be an anxious person. He began reacting to everyday normal situations that offered no threat or danger in an inappropriate anxious manner. Certain smells and sounds would trigger flashbacks or past traumatic events. This response was now a habit, a learnt behaviour, and was happening seemingly automatically. This caused D even more distress as he couldn't stop or control the anxious response and he had no idea what was going on. D was later diagnosed with PTSD. D found it hard to sleep. Constant intrusive and worrying thoughts, some in the form of flashbacks, some in the form of future insecurities, always upset his sleeping pattern. He would lie awake in bed incessantly worrying not only about challenges he was facing at work, but also pretty much everything and everyone. He would routinely take every little thing he thought about and blow it way out of proportion. He didn't realize then that these anxious thoughts were a byproduct of a high anxiety condition, fueled by high anxiety levels. If he wasn't stuck in an anxious state, he wouldn't have all these inappropriate, anxious thoughts. He wouldn't keep having these recurring flashbacks to the extent that he was having. Being on high alert all the time was seriously affecting all areas of his life. He was so highly strung because of his underlying high anxiety, which kept him stuck in a highly sensitized, agitated state, that he would spin into an anxious state, spin into survival and protection mode. When he was surprised by sudden loud noises. In fact, whenever he was surprised, for whatever reason. And even when people came into his personal space, this included anyone from friends, loved ones and strangers, depending on how anxious he was at the time. When his children would come up and surprise him from behind, he would completely nut off at them and verbally attack them for sneaking up on him, a completely inappropriate response. Whenever he went out into a public place, he was always looking around for any threat. If he was in a cafe, for example, he would sit up against the wall and in a position where he could easily see a threat, and also so he could escape easily should the need arise. Of course, there was no real threat, and Dee knew that, but it didn't stop him from triggering the anxious or panic response. This response was by now an habitual pattern of behaviour, learnt over the course of his policing career. Dee wasn't aware back then, but he wasn't actually using coping strategies or safety crutches to keep him safe from any threat like he thought, but to keep his anxious sensations at bay. Dee couldn't figure out why he couldn't stop the anxious sensations when he knew that there was nothing to fear. The turning point for Dee was when he understood that the problem wasn't the anxiety-provoking situation, because logically he didn't fear them and he knew that. The problem was how he was consciously reacting to the initial uncomfortable and horrible anxious sensations that were triggered by the situations. What he actually feared was the anxious sensations, not the situation.
I'll explain this further in the next lesson. D had taught himself to be an anxious person. This was an habitual pattern of behaviour. Underlying high anxiety was driving the inappropriate flashbacks, intrusive and worrying thoughts about pretty much anything he thought of, and this also affected his sleep. He had also taught himself to react to normal everyday situations as outlined above with a completely inappropriate anxious response. He had trained his subconscious mind to go into survival and protection mode, to flick the anxious or panic button when there was absolutely no need. The subconscious mind was only doing what it was told, directed by D's anxious reactions and conscious thoughts, signaling that he needed protection. It didn't matter that there was no real threat, and that D knew this. It made no difference that this was a false alarm. The subconscious mind is just doing its job, doing what it is told to by D's fearful thoughts and actions. It doesn't know that his initial triggered anxious response to loud noises or someone approaching from behind is completely disproportionate and inappropriate to the situation. And D's fearful thoughts and actions were fueled by high anxiety. The flashbacks were also driven or fueled by the underlying high anxiety. Man, what a vicious cycle indeed.
So you will no doubt relate to D's story so far only too well. So let's quickly recap.
D's inappropriate flashbacks, intrusive and worrying thoughts are fueled by his underlying anxiety condition. The more he focused on these intrusive thoughts and flashbacks, the more he tries to push them away, and the more he gets, and the more intense they get also. What you resist persists. What you focus on, you tend to get more of. This is a vicious cycle. Underlying high anxiety also caused him to react to everyday normal situations in a completely inappropriately anxious manner. Over time, this anxious or panic response became an habitual pattern of behavior. This response would now be automatically triggered whenever D was exposed to the anxiety-provoking situation. D developed safety crutches and coping strategies to help him control or cope with these situations, if he couldn't avoid them in the first place. Without his safety crutches, D's initial anxious or panic response would spiral out of control and trigger the emergency response or panic attack.
Let's quickly talk about the panic cycle. I discuss panic attacks at length in Lesson 5, and I also explain the panic cycle in Lessons 5.1. You might want to take a quick peek at Lessons 5.1 just to familiarise yourself with the panic cycle. So your conscious reaction to the initial sensations is based on fear, based on resistance, and this attitude actually fuels the anxious response. This attitude seems fair enough, as the sensations are very uncomfortable, and naturally enough, you want them gone. In student D's case, these sensations are triggered by entering a cafe, for example. This is the start of the panic cycle as outlined in Lessons 5.1. Please have a look at this lesson now, if you haven't already, to get an idea of how your initial thoughts spiral out of control, eventually activating the emergency response experienced as a panic attack. Now, in your case, whatever that is, if you use a coping strategy or safety crutch to handle the anxiety-provoking situation, you may successfully foil the onset of a panic attack, but you will be inadvertently strengthening your anxious behavior because your actions are based around fear, resistance, signaling to your subconscious that you were in fact in danger and therefore need protection. I am now introducing you to the idea that it is your conscious choice in the moment on how you react and behave to the initial sensations that decide whether they fizzle out to nothing or spiral out of control and into a panic attack. No matter what is happening automatically, no matter what pops up from the subconscious as part of an habitual pattern of behavior, you are controlling what happens next in this very moment with your conscious choice of how you want to react and behave. All will be revealed in the next lesson. For example, my student D soon realized that when he was surprised by a loud noise or when startled by his children from behind, even though this might trigger an automatic anxious response which puts him in survival and protection mode, he had the conscious power in the moment to choose how he wanted to react.
He understood by this stage that the initial sensations were a learnt response aimed at protecting him from, well, nothing. His subconscious mind had been trained to protect him, but this was a false alarm. Even though he couldn't stop this anxious response at this stage, he knew that he could control what happens next through his conscious choice on how he reacted. He knew that he had the conscious ability in the moment to turn off the anxious response. Not stop the anxious response from surfacing in the first place, but to disempower it, turn it off, by a conscious attitude of non-resistance, fearlessness, and stop the initial sensations before they spiral into a panic attack.
Building Blocks 2, Module 3, is going to teach you what D has learnt and more, and will drill down to what it is that you actually fear. It will teach you the one and only technique that you need to heal yourself, your conscious attitude. This is the really, really important stuff. Here are two awesome quotes from one of my favorite trainers and teachers, Dr. Reed Wilson.
Your commitment, your resistance to fight or avoid your discomfort actually causes your continued problem with panic. The single most important way to win over panic attacks is to change your attitude towards the panic. Techniques will not conquer panic, attitude will.
What BB3 will teach you how to do is completely disempower the panic response. Stop panic in its tracks without safety crutches and coping strategies. Building Blocks 3 will give you the faith that you can go into any situation and not fear the fear.
Building Blocks 3 will not stop the initial anxious sensations. It can't, because at the moment it is an habitual pattern of behavior. Building Blocks 4 will do that. But you will learn that this doesn't matter. It's how you consciously respond. It's the conscious message that you send to the subconscious in the moment that matters. No coping strategies, no safety crutches.
Building Blocks 4 will help you remove the underlying high anxiety conditioned behavior. If you adopt and implement the behavioral and attitude changes outlined in Building Blocks 4, make them part of your daily life, make them a habit, you will remove the underlying anxious behavior and replace it with new non-anxious behavior.
By doing that, you remove the inappropriate flashbacks, intrusive and worrying thoughts. And as a non-anxious person, you remove the inappropriate anxious response to all those situations that triggered such a response. In this normal state, you will worry when there is something to worry about. You will become anxious when there is something to become anxious about, and you will panic when there is something to panic about.
This is going to take practice and repetition on your part. There is no magic bullet here. You taught yourself to be an anxious person, now you have to teach yourself to be a non-anxious person. But you can do it. You can do it through the Attack Panic program, because I am going to be here walking you through every step of the way. I will be there for you, showing you exactly what you need to do. I will be your personal coach. If I can do it, if D can do it, and we will follow his progress through upcoming lessons, then so can you. Your subconscious mind is your friend and will do whatever you tell it to do, including protecting yourself, preparing you for fight or flight, even in situations that do not warrant such a response. This is good news. You are going to learn how to use the power of your subconscious mind for good and not evil. You are going to learn in the upcoming lessons that you are consciously in control of how you want to react. It is your conscious choice in any moment that determines whether your initial anxious sensations and thoughts spiral out of control in any given situation. You will learn how to deal with the intrusive and worrying thoughts and flashbacks. I really do hope that this lesson has not only built up your knowledge and understanding of what you are going through, but also to give you faith and confidence that you can be well again. You can heal yourself.
And I also hope that you can now see how all the conditions are closely related. PTSD is not a disorder or a standalone condition. To break its shackles over you, you must form this belief if you are to move forward and to do what you need to do to heal yourself. To believe in the opposite, to believe that you suffer from a mental illness or disorder, is just asking for trouble, asking for more of what you are currently getting.
If you have watched the lesson on my story, you can see how it is very similar to Dee's. Very similar experiences, but two different diagnoses. It just so happened I was diagnosed with GAD and later social phobia and agoraphobia. But I could have so easily been diagnosed with PTSD as well. I could have easily been given that label. It ultimately wouldn't have made any difference because the healing process, the answer is the same, no matter what you have been labelled with. So I do have some understanding of what you are going through. I've seen my fair share of shit too.
I can still hear the blood-curdling screams of pain from victims crushed and trapped in motor vehicles, or hear the last gasp of breath from a victim dying of stab wounds. I can still smell the stench of burnt bodies or decomposing bodies, of death. I can still see death, physical violence and sexual abuse. I can still remember and feel the helplessness and fear from threats and violent attacks. I can still see and hear my dad taking his last breath.
Certain situations, whether it's something I see, hear or smell, remind me of past experiences all too often. If I go into a hospital, for example, if I smell things like rubber gloves, of all things. But that's just how it is. It is. There is nothing I can do about it. I can't erase the memory, and I never will. I'm not sure if I ever want to. I'm at peace with myself, and I love myself unconditionally, warts and all. I am who I am where I am doing what I am doing because of all my experiences, good and bad. And you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. But that's all they are now, just memories that come and go without a second thought. I have made my peace with them. Time has healed, and I don't have any attachment to them. I have grieved, and I have healed over time. Acceptance, gratitude, forgiveness, among other things, have a big part to play. More on that in later lessons. I no longer have an underlying anxiety condition, fueling inappropriate intrusive flashbacks and worrying thoughts. This is how it is for most, and so it should be for you, and so it will be for you very soon once we have removed your underlying high anxiety condition. Now, I am working with a large number of soldiers who have also seen some pretty ugly shit, it's fair to say. I can't even begin to try and understand what they have gone through, and I don't even try to make out that I do. I don't know how anyone can get over some of the stuff that they have seen and experienced. I have a student in Australia who was a victim of a horrendous gang rape, who was lucky to even be alive following the ordeal. There is no way I'll ever understand what the pain of that memory must be like. How anyone that has been victim to such horrific experiences can make peace and heal is beyond me. But they do, somehow. What I have seen in the police is that somehow these courageous people do. They do manage to make peace and move on. Their lives will never be the same, but they are able to move on. My job is to remove the underlying anxious habitual condition that is keeping sufferers stuck in perpetual anxious cycles so that they can get on with their lives as normally as possible, to grieve, make peace, and heal without the distraction of inappropriate anxious behaviour. We've got lots of work to do. I'll see you very soon in the next lesson.